Yeah, right. People are sick of hearing me talk.
I don't do this.
Every year?
No, I think this is the first one.
And everyone, I don't think our mics are on, so I can't start yet. Oh, wait a minute.
We're here.
They need to turn on.
Nope, I don't think that was nice last night.
It was great.
Thanks for
We had a really good.
Please take your seats. We're going to begin the program.
Program's about to begin. Ready? I know if I were Father Jim, I would say in the name of the Father. Thank you all again for being here. I'm excited to have this conversation. And before I start, I would like to thank all of you for your philanthropic work, because that's big, especially in support of the Catholic Education Foundation and the tuition assistance you provide to students who otherwise could not afford to attend a Catholic K-12 school in our city. You do not have to give back, but you do, and for that we thank you. Can everyone hear me, especially in the back? Cool. So we live in this time when so many people are asking the meaning of corporate responsibility. My hope is that all of you on this panel will bring clarity to what it means to be ethical in a world consumed by so much noise. I teach young leaders at Loyola Marymount University who strive to become ethical leaders. These young people are completely open to that. They are good people. But I worry in a world where unethical behavior is rewarded or ignored for seemingly the greater good, I worry these young people are getting the wrong message, that the good guy doesn't win, that the bad guy is continually rewarded. And I think that makes it incredibly hard to be an ethical leader today, to be any kind of leader today, because there's so much noise surrounding you. So I guess that's my first question. Is it difficult to be a leader today? Anyone want to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
I honestly don't think it's difficult to be an ethical leader because, we've talked about this a lot. It's part of the DNA of most people in this room to be ethical and to be leaders. And so it's not something that you turn on or turn off. I mean, it's something, I think about, how I became a leader and how I became an ethical leader, and it started, frankly, at the dinner table with my parents and my 6 siblings and talking about values. And so when you start at that young age and that's part of your DNA and that's part of who you are, you can't all of a sudden separate from that and say, well, I'm gonna cut short on this or do this that may be close to the line. You tend to do the right thing, which is, again, part of the reason the Catholic education and the values that you learn in Catholic education are very important. So it starts at a very young age. It starts with your parents, your siblings, your teachers, your priests, your nuns. You know, I credit most of my ethics to Monsignor Torgerson, because he was my priest at so Monsignor Torgerson and I've known each other roughly 60 years. When I started first grade at Holy Trinity, he was the young associate there. But it's true. I mean, it's those types of people in your life that make you an ethical leader, and that's what kids today need, is that kind of example, that kind of value.
I do agree with you, but I think that, you know, you have this moral center, and somebody's going to hate it, and somebody's going to put pressure on you to change your decisions because it's good business sometimes. So how do you fight that, Maria?
So I agree with a lot what Bob said. You know, I think that journey, you know, for me began at home, you know, very traditional Hispanic home, and definitely centered in faith. Going to Catholic schools, and you gave a shout out to my alma mater, LMU, that where to me, I've always called that experience foundational to who I am. And going into the workforce out of college, I definitely saw the clash of who I was as a value-centered person and maybe the workforce. This was 1987, so very different workforce than today. But upon reflection, I think that during that time, I was able to at least lean into my values and stand firm on those values. So it was how I was raised. It was what was reinforced in school. And in LMU, I was allowed to explore beyond just the family structure within the context of a value system. So I'm a big believer in the Catholic education and how important that is, and especially today with so much noise. If our Catholic schools are there to reinforce the faith-based growth that happens at home, I think we need to embrace that and make sure that it's strengthened.
So, Rick, how would you implement or express your beliefs about what it takes to be ethical in your workplace? How do you do that? How do you inspire your employees?
Well, it's a good question. I agree with everything that was said, and I'll take a little bit different twist on it. I think when you're talking about ethical leadership, the question is also how do you define that? How do you define the ethics of something? And so I look at it, everybody has a different way probably of looking at it. I look at it that you have to have a strong system of being driven by doing what's right. It's not always politically correct, but it's doing what's right. And to your point, it's complicated. I think it's easy maybe internally, but it's not easy necessarily in practice, depending on the entity or the decision that you're making. And we saw it play out on university campuses over the last couple of weeks, just to bring it home, you know, into real life situation, the decision of how to deal with protesters on campus. Was there an ethical decision? Well, I think there was a right decision of how to go about it. And so I always, whether at the time I was the chair of USC or in my own business, to get to your point, I always ask myself, who am I serving? And who I'm serving helps drive whether or not you're making the right decision. Because if you're in a role of a fiduciary, like being the chair of USC or a trustee, in my opinion, you have to do what's in the best interest of the students. Pure and simple. And it's complicated to make those decisions, but I think leadership is all about taking a stance, planting a flag, getting people excited about where you want to go and how you want to get there, and making sure that you're always bringing people along. Because it's like a friend of mine always says, a leader without followers is just somebody going for a walk. And I don't want to, I love going for a walk, but if if you're in a job of being a leader, you really have to think long and hard about how you bring people along with you. And I would tell you, my experience is people gravitate towards goodness and an opportunity to do what's right. You could argue about how the spectrum of ethics, I think, is a very big spectrum.
Well, let's focus on that. The spectrum of ethics. What does Rick mean by that, do you think? Did you deal with that in your business?
Let me back up. Business is part of life. And we've already learned from some people with a wealth of experience that their foundation of values and their foundation and perception of ethics and how it's defined was built at an early age. And often it begins at the family table. It begins at the school that you're attending, and hopefully it's a school that has some, religious dimension. And if it's a Catholic school, then you're even better off, because the Catholic tenets of their education, I think, would probably better define what ethics is all about. So now you have the foundation, and then you continue through school. You begin to, experience relationships with young people. You go off to college, you get your first job, and at some point, based on talent, sometimes you can make it to a leadership position. So if you are a person that demonstrates and believes and lives those values, not lip service, you have to live and believe those values, then as Rick pointed out, you can get people to follow you, and you can get people to emulate you. And you're giving them the opportunity to manifest their personal growth and their destiny. And that's the kind of organization that, and ethical may be a small.
But I think internally it would be
word.
very difficult to believe something and do the right thing, which are two different things. So how do you wrestle with that, in your heart of hearts before you make that decision for the good of your business?
Yeah, for me, it's interesting. I had the benefit of, early on in my career working, you mentioned, for the Dodgers, and it was owned at the time by a family with ethics beyond reproach, the O'Malley and Seidler family. And I remember, tell you a story. I remember I was CFO at the time when I first started there, before I became EVP of Business Ops and ultimately president. And I remember having a conversation, it was early in my career there, having a conversation with Peter O'Malley, and we were trying to determine price increases. I think the most expensive ticket at Dodger Stadium at the time was $6.50 or something, just to put it in perspective. And I wanted him to raise, because I was the CFO, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much money you're leaving on the table. I said, I want to raise the tickets to $8.50. And he's like, no, Bob, I don't want to do that. We argued over whether we should raise them $2 or $1. And we're going on and we're going back and forth, and then he stopped me and he said, Bob, if we raise ticket prices and parking prices and concession prices the way you want to, our customers are going to go home with their wallets empty. And I said, yeah, so what? He goes, that was me. So it's not always easy to practice, because I'm like, I want the company to make as much money as it possibly can. And he said, how many times do you think they're going to come back if we raise prices like that? And it got me to think that, when you think of the long game, and it's easier to do when you're older, but when you think of the long game, it's easier to do the right thing, because you want a relationship with your customers, you want a relationship with your employees, you want a relationship with your community. You're not swooping in. And it's harder today in the world of private equity and everything else to do that, but if you take a long-term view, it is much easier to do it.
Sounds very difficult to me. I was talking to Maria at the reception about this, about going back to the Gaza, Israel, and the turmoil the country is going through. Like, as a business leader, how do you decide whether and when to take a stand? Because young consumers seem to want corporate leaders to take a political stand that they can follow. So how is an ethical, moral business leader, do you do that? How do you decide to do that?
Yeah, and we were talking that very much the role of the chamber is the business advocate, to be that leader that can make a statement, for example. We were talking about that. And we have taken positions where we've made public statements before, and it really involves not just one person, a team of leaders at the chamber who can really evaluate something. Back to what you were saying, the stakeholders, who are your customers, who needs to hear from you. And that's how we evaluate when we make statements. We made a statement, for example, when those racist statements were made in City Hall last year with the murder of George Floyd. I mean, those were really complex conversations in the boardroom.
How long did you guys take to decide what exactly to say and how to word it? And then once it was out, how it was accepted?
I can tell you with George Floyd, it was probably about 4 days before we actually made a statement, but I was working on it every day. Everyone was looking at it, everyone needed to review it, and we did that whole process. That was very well received. I didn't get a lot of blowback on that, but I did have companies, our members, coming up to me or calling me and telling me, we're glad the chamber took that position and made that statement, because we didn't need to. And so for some organizations, they were able to say, we're not making a statement, but we're a member of the chamber, and here's the chamber statement. With the tapes that were released 2 years ago, that was a very difficult process for the chamber. We had to issue 2 statements. The first one was viewed as not strong enough. And at the time, we were still collecting information. We hadn't had the full, the full release of the entire tape, and the board was meeting daily. So probably 3 days later was when we issued a fuller statement. But that was definitely very complex in our boardroom. People wanting to hear all sides from different perspectives, and
yet because of your moral center, you felt this had to be done, not only for the sake of the 235,000 businesses you represent, but
in both cases, my first call was to my board chair and say, we at least have to talk about this. We have to get the board together. This is very large that is happening, something within the city or the country, and people are going to want to hear from the chamber. And I felt that that was the right thing to do in those cases, and knowing that we wouldn't please everyone.
I don't think it's possible to please everyone.
But I think there's times where you make a decision. It really depends on what the issue is. And I don't think business leaders, corporate executives should feel the need to take a position on everything that's going on. Because again, go back, who is your duty to? And if you're running a public company, your duty is to your employees and your shareholders. And you may not want to be issuing an opinion on something. So I think it has to be depending on the facts and the circumstances. But I do think one of the problems we're seeing in our state, our city, our county, our country is the fear of our elected officials from taking good positions that are based on a moral compass. And the silence, to me, that decision is a massive failure that's leading to a whole bunch of unhappiness, I think, in our country.
But I think that is the reason that especially younger consumers want corporate leaders to take a stand on issues. And it works for some. Patagonia, for example, into climate change. They base their business model on that, and it really works for them.
But that's their business model. That's what I'm saying. It's in the context of who you're serving and if it relates to your business. Patagonia will probably not issue a statement, and maybe they have, on Gaza, right? Because companies also don't want to alienate their customers. So you got to deal with the reality of that. Issue on climate change, of course. That's their business model. That's what they're selling through to. And so I think you have to look at who you have a duty to, what your business is it there in alignment? Because otherwise, younger people are smart. If somebody issues a statement on something and there's no relationship between the facts and who's issuing the statement, there's not authenticity. Statements and positions carry weight and move people if there's authenticity to it. right? And so, anyway, that's
Well,
just,
No, but that's interesting because I think today corporate leaders serve a role other than as examples of good business people. People are really looking for someone who is a leader who takes a stand. And sometimes our political leaders put pressure on companies not to take a stand or punish them because they've taken a stand.
yeah, sure.
And I just wondered how that pressure feels as a business leader. You're thinking hard, I know, I can see it.
No, I want to run away.
No one wants to tackle that. I just think that
You're
would
right.
be incredible.
It's,
Carol, can I add something to that? Because I think one thing that Rick said is really important is the authenticity piece of it. You don't want a business to come out and make a statement and then live completely different values. And I think that's when I talk to young people, they're looking for an organization that they can see themselves in and grow in, and definitely, the values of what they're looking for needs to come from the top. And you could tell. You could tell whether.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, you could tell whether they're words that are just on the website or they're words that are truly lived throughout the organization.
But we see it with the younger generation on our properties as our consumers. Their priorities are what they care about, and they want to support and shop and do business with companies that reflect their priorities, that do reflect a good environment, that do reflect sustainability, that do reflect giving back to the community. We have companies, retailers that only do business with landlords that have the same shared sort of list of priorities in their companies. And I think that's great, because then you're building this ecosystem that supports each other.
I think that even though a company might take an authentic stance, I think that the political forces today sometimes squashes that. And I'm not talking California specifically, but let's say Florida, and what happened to Disney.
Right.
And I just wondered if you could just help us understand that kind of pressure.
From my perspective, and we get pressure all the time on various companies we do business with and stands that we take. I'll give you an example. There's tremendous amount of pressure on a firm like ours, like JP Morgan, to not fund or not support fossil fuel industries. We cannot turn off the spigot on the fossil fuel industry immediately, or else this country's going to be a mess. And so we have made a commitment that, sure, we're going to continue to support sustainability, green energy, et cetera, but we're going to continue to support the fossil fuel energy industry as well, because fact of the matter is that's what's best for this country. That's what's best for these communities. We get a lot of grief from Washington on that. Jamie Dimon, our CEO, takes pressure all the time on doing that, but it's the right thing to do, and we can't succumb to the whims of the politicians in terms of trying to shut that down, because it's not what's in the best interest of our clients, it's not what's in the best interest of the communities, nor is it in the best interest of the country. So shoot away at us, because we're going to continue to do that.
How do you fight that? Do you have strategy sessions? Because
sure. We have a governmental relations department that's an army of just trying to. I was back in Washington about a year and a half ago, shortly before the banking crisis, and it was after we had helped the Silicon Valley Bank and the First Republic. It was actually before we bought First Republic. All the politicians are like, "It's great you put $5 billion on deposit with First Republic. We don't want you to get bigger. We don't want JP Morgan to get bigger." And then a few weeks later, it's like, First Republic's either going under or we're buying them, so we got to get bigger. The politicians weren't happy with that, but it was the best outcome. So you fight it just by trying to talk to these elected officials, but as all of you guys know, it's not an easy thing to do. We do fly-ins, we meet at City Hall, Maria's team.
We take a whole army to
we
DC.
Take a whole army, we try and explain it, but at the end of the day, and Rick, you said this yesterday, it all comes down to votes. It all comes down to, are we going to be painted as the big bad corporate entities that, and I keep saying to people, we employ 325,000 people who feed their kids and educate them and put a roof over their head because we employ So don't look at our company or any of our other companies as being evil. I mean, it is, it's not corporate America's bad and the individual worker's good. Without corporate America, you're not going to have the individual worker. So it's that conversation, but the votes are coming from, the rank and file.
So what is it like when you go to Washington and you have these conversations? Because, partisanship is at an all-time high. There seemingly is no middle ground any longer. And it's kind of safe to heap criticism on corporations and businesses.
We think it's so important to do those visits, not only in Washington, D.C., but in Sacramento. And we want our elected officials to be educated on these issues. I mean, what Bob's talking about, there's a real risk there to just say we're going to, no more fossil fuels. I mean, those are jobs and there's transitions, and most of those companies are on board with some sort of transition plan, but they get no credit for what they're doing. So education is a big part of that. And I also think that as a business community, it's so important that our elected officials hear from the actual business leaders that are they can hear from me at the chamber, but when I can walk in with, somebody like Bob or others that are members that can speak to their firsthand experience, it is so powerful in those rooms to relay your experience of how that's going to impact your organization, your workforce, your ability to sustain communities, like what Bob mentioned. I mean, I am the biggest believer that business is a force for good for many of the things that he just mentioned.
See, I'm sort of hearing a defensive tone, and I don't mean that to be mean in any way, but I think that there is this notion, and I'll pose this question to you, Rick, that you're only out in it to make money, and that's about it, and the bottom line is the only thing that's important to you, and there's no such thing as an ethical business person in this world.
Well,
Thanks. You just
I don't know why that
insulted
question is given to me.
Boy. Go for it, Rick. Go for it.
Yeah, you must be talking to my pastor too, Torgerson. Now, listen, I'm happy to answer that. I would say this, a couple of things. My experience of going to Washington, and we just spent some time back there, forget about the really loud extremists. You got loud extremists on the right, you got loud extremists on the left. They're just a bunch of noise, and I wish they'd all just go away. My experience in being back in Washington, whether it's sitting down with Republicans or Democrats, there's a lot of good, thoughtful people. The majority are good, thoughtful people who are trying to do the right thing. You're always going to have a difference of opinion. What Maria said is vitally important. You have to educate them on the issues. At least educate them on your point of view. So I think that middle, the majority, the silent majority that's sitting in Congress, sitting in the Senate, are thoughtful, good people trying to do the right thing, coming from different perspectives. But they're open-minded to talk about things. Now, you may never agree, but I don't think they look at every business coming through the door as being unethical or out for the wrong thing. Are we in business to make money? Sure we are. We're in a capitalist society, and you want to do that. We're also in business to do the right thing. We're also in business to give back. We're also in business to support philanthropies. So there's a whole bunch of missions good businesses are in. Unethical businesses that are only focused on making money, in my experience, don't stay in business. So they weed themselves out. It's almost like this purification system that just happens naturally because people don't want to do business with them. And that could go for a school, it could go for a religion, it could go for anything. But what I am hopeful of, and it may not happen this cycle, what I am hopeful of is that things quiet down and government does go back to reaching across the aisle and working together. And I think as business people and leaders, whether it's leaders in education, leaders in faith, need to spend time in Washington educating people, because this is a hit on elected officials. I am not a believer in career politicians. I don't think you should spend your life in elected office. I don't think it was ever intended by the framers of our country. What was intended is you work, you go to the government, you serve, and then you go back. And the reason I think that's important is because you've got to bring real life experience to that job in order to make good decisions for, again, those you're serving, your constituents. And so we need to get some fresh blood in there. We need to get people with real life experience. And then I think these dialogues even get more enriched. But I'm optimistic that there's a good group of people in Washington trying to do the right thing as long as they can withstand the noise from the sides. And I think we've got that issue in the city and the state.
I agree.
I'm more skeptical, but you're nodding.
I do agree with that. I do agree that when we visit visit with both sides. We don't get the meetings with the extremes.
Yeah, no point.
They don't want to meet with the chamber. But I have to say, I mean, when we walk into those rooms, it's not like I'm just walking with big business. You know, LA is a very diverse business community. Our small businesses are, 90% of all
90%.
businesses here in Los Angeles. We have a robust community-based organizations. The Salesian Youth Center is here. They go to Washington, D.C. with us. So when we're walking into a room, and I can have J.P. Morgan Chase on one side and XYZ Small Business Bakery and the Salesian Youth Center with us, that gives them a perspective of the business community that is here in Los Angeles, which I believe is a very giving business community. And I'm very optimistic of that community. I mean,
Can I just add on to what we talked about yesterday? Because
yes.
Bob and Maria and I were together yesterday. If businesses encourage and motivate their employees to get out and vote, educate your employees. You can't tell them who to vote to or what to vote for. I'm not suggesting that. But educating them on the importance of issues, you will change the direction of the city, the state, and this country. Because, and I think the biggest threat we have in this country is apathy, and people don't vote. And then we all complain, right? And so we got to get the younger generation to vote. We got to talk about it in our high schools. We got to talk about it in our colleges. But people need to get out and vote because, again, the loud, angry, ugly ones are consuming a lot of oxygen, and they're changing direction of our governments, and we got to bring that back.
Yeah, the other thing I would say about government, and my wife Wendy and I've talked about this a lot, is when you go back to Washington, you realize that a lot of the people that are helping make the decisions are really young, inexperienced people that are trying to learn stuff. So when we were back there last year and we went to see Maxine Waters, and it was her staff who knew very little about the banking industry, and we kept saying to them, talk to us, we'll explain it to you. Well, I mean, so you've got people back there who have come out of educational institutions in a large part who haven't taught this, and as we've talked about, many of the educational institutions are very liberal and kind of have been programmed in a particular way. But if you can help work with the younger professionals in Washington and Sacramento and City Hall and trying to get them to understand.
So if those young people were receptive to what you were trying to teach them, what would you say to them?
Well, I would try and, because especially our business, it's a complex business, retail business. It's a complex business. You have to understand the complexities of those businesses, which I agree with Rick. It's better to have people who have some experience outside the public sector come into the public sector because they understand what it takes to meet payroll. They understand what the city business tax or the ULA impacts them as a business owner. It helps. So I would suggest to them that they get private sector experience in addition to just being in the public sector, because it is not easy running businesses, and yet it really is the backbone of our communities.
Absolutely, and I would say that would be true for most elected officials that don't have any private sector experience. And so what we find is when we're having conversations of the policies that they're voting on that impact businesses, having to just educate them is half the battle.
We seem to have backed into a broader scope for today. We started talking about ethical leadership focusing on businesses. Now we're talking about ethical leadership focusing on politicians. So that may be a bit more of an oxymoron. Their motivations, notwithstanding getting constituents, off of their chairs and voting, they're listening to the party telling them what to do, hence the polarization, and very little actually gets done that's really helping the country. So I think when we say we need to educate them, I think the first area of education that I would love to wave a magic wand and give them would be what we just discussed, is that in formative years, you developed values, and those values became your habits. So in our audience today, there are young people, there are there are older, there are, tall and short, and, men, women. They are all potential ethical leaders, as long as they have that ethical foundation. So if you start with an ethical person, you're going to get an ethical leader. And yes, there are pressures for profitability, but as Rick pointed out, many of those pressures actually do a disservice to retaining talent, to retaining your clients, because they don't want to deal with people who are pulling a fast one or dishonest, things like their integrity and loyalty and, all the tenets that we kind of began our conversation on. So, bringing politics into it, this is a very, very hard bag to describe. And
that's why I think it's so hard to be a leader today, because politics color everything we do today. Because, and we do listen to the extremes, and they're really loud. Really loud. So I think that, if you're a strong, moral business leader wanting to stick to your beliefs and yet run a good business and make money to continue the business, and all of this noise is around you, I just think it would be really hard.
I don't think it's that hard.
Yeah.
Really?
Neither do I.
No. Good leaders, it's not hard. Maybe if you're a bad leader.
Good leader.
Good leaders, it's not hard.
Good
and
leader.
you end up having, that gives you the fuel and the confidence to withstand the attacks. I actually get excited about taking a position that I really know is right, and I know I'm going to get my head kicked in. I think it's fun. So
I think it's that courage.
I guarantee you, and
it's
I know
important.
I know it is courage.
I know Jamie pretty well at JP Morgan. He does not find taking the right position difficult.
Yep.
And he does not worry about getting his head kicked in.
Right.
Because
he gets his head kicked in every other day.
It fuels him. And that, yeah. It's a good, healthy challenge.
Yeah. But, and I think it's, I look out in this audience and, doing that will be inspirational to the next generation and to other leaders. The fact of the matter is, you don't just become an ethical leader overnight. You're inspired by others who are ethical leaders and who are standing out. I'm inspired every single day by different people in terms, it's like, I'm inspired by my wife, who spent the last 35 years trying to improve public education in Los Angeles.
And trying to improve you.
Yeah, that she's still working on.
She's doing a good job.
I'm inspired by my colleagues at the LA 84 Foundation. I'm inspired and all the great work they're doing. Rick, I'm inspired. I was reading The Real Deal a couple months ago, and it's a magazine on real estate deals, and I wasn't inspired by the real estate deals you were doing. I was inspired by the fact that Lou Horn said that you were so important to him when his 15-and-a-half-year-old son had passed away unexpectedly. I was inspired by that. So I get inspiration when people take stands or do things that they're not like in the spotlight. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to be that inspiration to others, whether it's hard or easy. It's most times it's going to be hard, but be that inspiration.
Yep, you're right.
So I brought politics into the picture. Now it's time
I'm trying to get you out
now,
of it.
now it's time to bring religion into the picture.
Bless you, my child.
When I was asked to moderate this panel, I was thinking Catholic, business, ethical. So I decided to look up what Pope Francis thought of business leaders. And there's a new book out about Pope Francis, and he's quoted in the book as saying this: In no part of the Bible is there a commandment to produce poverty, but, he added, in no way is it bad to produce wealth for the good of all. Indeed, to produce it is an act of justice, and for that justice to be complete, it has to be distributive. Now, the second part of the Pope's quote, to produce wealth is an act of justice, and for that justice to be complete, it has to be distributive. That word, distributive, is controversial in some circles. So if you were having coffee with the Pope, how would you help him realize his vision in a capitalist economy? Rick, you want to take that on?
Sure. Listen, I was really honored. My family, my wife, my kids, and I spent 30 minutes with Pope Francis last summer. We were invited to be with him. And he's an amazing man with a very clear vision. Now, you want to talk about a good leader that isn't scared about getting his head kicked in, right? He's an inspiration. He says it the way it is. He puts his positions out there. He's got a great sense of humor. I asked him what his favorite prayer was, and he talked about, Monsignor, what? I'm blanking on the saint.
St. Thomas More.
St. Thomas More was the prayer. And it was about laughing and happiness and joy in your life every day. And I think in spending time with the Pope, I don't think he's got anything against making money. What he wants people to do is be successful the way God wants you to be successful. He's given us all gifts. Use those gifts. And if it translates into making a lot of money, great. And then give back to the community. That's what we all do in this room. Right? And that's a really good thing. That doesn't mean you give your wealth away so that you're poor. I don't think you have to do that. But, you know, last night we support Para Los Niños. They had their fundraiser last night. A young girl started in school on Skid Row at their campus. The campus that Tina and I work with goes from 6 months to 6 years old. It's amazing. Outside those doors is the worst sea of humanity you will ever see, Skid Row. Inside those doors, it is beautiful. That young girl just finished her first year at Brown University on a full scholarship. How about that? And so the combination of people that make money and giving it to that school and the combination of the goodness of the people that are working at that school have fulfilled a dream for this young girl and her two parents who are living below the poverty line. And I think that's what business is about, is to be really enriched, to be really rich. You have that fulfillment that you've made other people's lives better. And you can do it through being very successful and giving back.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that too, because, and maybe I'm going back into politics, but I don't think what he's saying, and there's a difference between kind of a socialistic type of environment and distributive wealth. I mean, I am 100% against wealth taxes and stuff like that, because I don't think the government does a good job of distributing wealth and incentivizing people, et cetera. I think the private sector through philanthropy does a phenomenal job of doing that. And so I would tell them that the way to accomplish that isn't through socialism and wealth taxes and taxing the rich, and it's really about letting the people who are wealthy kind of use their riches to help others. And I think I see it every day. I see it in this room, see it on the stage, where people who have been successful have given back to their communities and have made incredible differences. I see it in us trying to bring, the World Cup here. It's all private. It's all been privately funded by people who want to make our community better, who aren't standing there saying, tax me so the government can put on these events. It's phenomenal when you see on a daily basis, like I do, successful people giving back and giving back impactfully.
And that's very inspiring right there. I would tell him, harness the power of the business community. By and large, I think, like what Bob said, they're, the business leaders that I speak to want to know how they can give back, how they can get involved in their community, how they can make the city better, the county better, the state better. So I think there is tremendous power there to really solve the type of problems that we're facing today. We need to harness that power. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges for the chambers, to be able to take the incredible resources that we have within our business community and bring it forward so that the private sector can participate with the public sector in solving these problems.
Philanthropy, much like what we're talking about, growth of values, growth of integrity, which translates to that ethical leader. Philanthropy is the same. So in our businesses, intergenerational transition is a critical part. And yes, there's the minefield of taxation. But more importantly, it's the legacy of philanthropy, their family, things that they're, all about, their value structure. And when you work with the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation, younger people aren't imbued automatically with a sense of philanthropy. You groom them by saying, you can be part of the family's foundation if you go out and find something that you want to donate your time to. And they're not going to donate their time to something they're not passionate about. So now they're down at the food kitchen doing whatever. Now they come back and they tell you about their experience and how they made a difference at the food kitchen. And now you allow them to earmark money to go there. And you've now built a foundation, you're reinforcing it, and the sky is the limit once they have been bit by this bug. And philanthropy then becomes part of their personal mosaic, much as we've tried to describe, what's an ethical leader? Well, it's all these different pieces that basically make you a wonderful human being. And philanthropy is part of it.
That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to tee up another tough question. In 2016, when I worked for CNN, I sat down with 3 of the wealthiest business leaders in the world. T. Boone Pickens, the oil tycoon, Leon Cooperman, a hedge fund manager, Ken Langone, the founder of Home Depot, and we talked in part about principled business practices. Each of these men spoke of their stunning generosity. 2 of them had signed Warren Buffett's giving pledge, a promise to give away at least half of their vast wealth to philanthropic causes, which is amazing. Mm-hmm. T. Boone Pickens has passed now, and he did that. That's amazing. All of these business leaders felt that by signing the pledge, it demonstrated they had a moral center, that they cared more about giving than taking. But they also told me they felt vilified for their monetary success. And I wondered if you could help me understand why they felt that way.
Well, I think, from my perspective, we have gone, and Charlie Munger, who just passed away, talked about that. We've entered a time where there's a tremendous amount of envy, as opposed to desire to say, I can be like that. You're envious of that person and you want to knock them down. And I think that has happened more recently than I've ever seen before. When I was younger growing up, I'd see somebody successful and say, I want to be like that person, not, that person is the oppressor and I'm the oppressed and that person's bad. I mean, the whole conversation today, in our society is about oppressor and oppressed. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me to think that somebody successful is defined as being the oppressor today. I mean, they are helping the oppressed as opposed to being the oppressor. And I think we have to change that narrative. That's why they feel vilified.
I think it is a narrative. I would agree that business is viewed as a villain a lot of times. And if you just look at the media, if you look at social media alone, you can be picked apart. It's happened to me, and when I think of I'm being picked apart, I think that, it is amazing that I think the narrative does need to change, because the contributions of business leaders, of businesses is pretty significant in building up communities. And it's not just about, rich and poor.
That's true. I think that most of us will never experience what it's like to be incredibly wealthy. So I think that people don't understand that you know, what you were speaking to. You give a lot of money away, but you're not going to make yourself poor by giving it away. And even in the Pope Francis's words, that would not be right. So I think that's maybe where it comes from. I don't know.
I think the media has a lot to do with it. Young people in particular are glued to so many of these, media sites which have perhaps incorrect information or not complete information. We pay sports figures an obscene amount of money, to perform for us. And then, of course, you can look at the corporate, giants. Part of growing into an ethical leader, part of just growing, your own personal integrity, I think has a component of being happy with your lot in life. This is my lot in life. These are the gifts I was given, as Rick pointed out. I think I turned off my gizmo. But being happy that this is where I am. I don't have to envy someone else. Sure, ambition is wonderful. And playing sports, I want them very competitive. Let's play hard. Businesses should be competitive. In fact, that competitiveness keeps both of them honest and does a better job of delivering better services and products. But fundamentally, I think people need to kind of reassess, do I want to live my life just, being envious or, hating or whatever the word du jour is, for someone who isn't me.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the student questions in just a second, but a last question from me. If you were counseling a young person on the value of being an ethical, moral business person, how would you convince that young person that that is the right way to go?
Yes.
Yep.
I would just use our company as an example. And at our company, we live by a handshake. Everybody learns we live by a handshake. You don't have to have a contract. If you promise something, that's it. You live by it. If it's a good decision or a bad decision, if we make money or we lose money, it's a decision and we lived our commitment. And I think we built a pretty good company based on that. And I think you just point to examples. And you have to guide and teach them. We have a very arduous continuing education program at our company for all employees. And part of it is reinforcing the ethics of doing business and doing it the right way.
So you have to walk the walk.
You have to walk the walk, because if you don't, people know it and they'll call you out on it and you lose credibility, and I think you end up losing your business.
What would you say?
I think it's also about serving the institution. So I'll just give myself as an example, as head of the LA Chamber. It's not about Maria, it's not about the folks that are there. It's the Chamber belongs to the region. And much like many institutions that you're a part of, you're there for the sake of the institution. Whether it's the clients, customers, students, whatever the institution is. And I think that's remaining authentic to the values that you have coming in is really important.
For me, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning is I would try and explain, the long game as opposed to the short game. Because the fact of the matter is, and I try and do this through narratives, through personal experiences, where somebody I may have encountered in a business dealing 30 years ago, still respects me today because of the way I dealt with them in that business dealing. And I'll give specific examples to my kids, to young people, because at the end of the day, their perspective is very different because they've got a very short perspective. But for me, nothing makes me feel better than somebody I had a business dealing with that said, you treated me honestly, you treated me respectfully, I would do business with you again. And that respect, at the end of the day, that's your brand, that's what you have when you're, when you take your last gasp of breath. That's what you have, that's what people are going to remember you for. So I think it's a narrative of, it may not seem like it today, and our oldest is 34, our youngest is 26, but I tell them all the time, 30 years from now, you're going to be dealing with people that you encounter today. Treat them respectfully, treat them honestly, don't screw them, all for the sake of, squeezing out a little bit more profit. I think that resonates with them. It's a little hard for them to understand because they're looking at it through a different lens, But hopefully by continuing, and again, it goes back to the inspiration, by continuing to try and inspire them to do that, it ultimately will happen.
So speaking to a young person, I think one of the first things I'd share is you're going to be around, hopefully, for a very long time. So take better care of your body, because you're going to need it, and it never forgets. You know, you break a leg, you go along for 40 years, and now you're hobbling around, especially on rainy days. And now that we've established you need to have that long view, let's take a look at your mind. And by mind, I am also saying your soul. And now we're getting into the values. Do you want to build a foundation of values where you kind of got away with stuff and you're kind of slick-willy, or do you want to be proud of every act that you take? Because your life is going to be cumulative, and your experience and all of your actions will speak volumes about you, and they will follow you for the rest of your life. Which right back to how do you grow an ethical leader? And it's back to the family, education, the Catholic school system. You know, those are terrific opportunities to put these building blocks in place that will sustain someone through their life and let them make the tough decisions when they come around. You know, Rick said, if you're an ethical guy, it's not hard to make the ethical decision for the company. I agree.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Now it's time for the student questions. Catherine and Paul are the two young people. Are you out there,
here?
Catherine and Paul? Okay, I will ask your questions. Okay. One of these came from Catherine and one of them came from Paul. I don't know which one. So the first one is, when you are trying to make a decision and faced with two good options, what steps do you take to ensure that you are making the correct decision?
Do your homework.
Yeah.
Let the facts guide you. You know, it's a matter of trying to be as smart as you can on the issue, and then you make the best decision you possibly can.
Don't you sometimes have to guess, though?
Well, I think there's a lot of guessing that goes on, and I think that is, you know, experience and quote unquote using your gut. That informs a lot of it, no doubt about it.
You know, earlier, Rick, you touched on who are the contingencies that are impacted. So for the business, you've got, you know, the shareholders, you've got your management and staff, so your customers, and now you also have your community. And if you start to put all these pieces together, it does make it a little bit more difficult, but it also may shed light on what the best decision would be. Whereas if you only view two options and don't really look at some of the impact further along the trail, and it can change and help you make smarter decisions.
And I can just go on the gut for a minute. I got to be honest with you. Most of the projects that I've built, I don't look at a lot of data. So when we built the Grove, everybody said, "Why are you building there? It's a terrible area to build." My gut was that it was the right area to build. And why are you not building a mall with a roof like every other mall? Well, my gut was people wanted to be outside. But there was no data to turn to at the time because nobody was doing it. So I think, to your point, whether you call it guessing or sort of an educated guess, or you're using your gut, or you're observing what's going on around you that informs your decision, all of those things play a big role.
And I would add to that I think, you know, leaders that have that experience, I think you mentioned that earlier, somebody mentioned the experience of being able to, you know, when it's your gut, you're going to bring your team along, and you're going to be able to explain to your team, you know, why it's important, the benefits and the outcomes, and that's the passion as well.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that is I am always never the smartest person in the room. And the fact of the matter is, if you have really strong people and you listen to their opinions, you may not agree with their opinions, and you encourage healthy discourse on the, oftentimes you'll come to the right conclusion because you're hearing kind of a diversity of opinion. And at the end of the day, the buck stops somewhere, and you've got to make a decision. And if you have people that are part of your team, they'll support that decision, whether they agreed with it or not, or whether it went down the path they, you know, and strong ethical leaders can bring the team along, like Maria said, and like Rick does. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you listen to them. I mean, they've got different perspectives. You listen to them, and I've made my share of bad decisions too, but it's not for lack of trying to educate and do your homework.
Gotcha. Okay, last question. We are living in a world that is strongly divided. My generation wants to make our world more civilized. What could your generation do to help pave the way for us to heal our world?
Whoa.
So we end on another tough one.
This sounds like a conversation from my dinner table.
Going back to the dinner table.
Do you care to take it, Maria?
I think, you talk a lot about generations in the workforce. There's 5 different generations in the workforce. And I think, to lift up what Bob was saying about hearing those different voices, I think you need to, make space for them all and ensure that young folks can express kind of what they're looking for, what they want. And I can just tell you with my young 20-year-olds that we have a lot of conversation, and sometimes I do feel like it's bridging a big gap that we have. And how they look at the future, and sometimes my son will say, well, I got to work hard, Mom, to fix what you did. So,
Wow.
But yeah, exactly.
Well, but I hear that a lot from young people. Like, you guys messed up the world.
Yeah.
Now it's up to us to fix it. But this question is like, well, you're in this too. You're still in the game.
Yeah.
So how can you help us fix it?
So I really do think, having civil conversations, different views. I think we've got to get rid of this cancel culture. We've got to get rid of this cancel culture where somebody says something. It's like, don't cancel somebody the minute, a sentence comes out of their mouth because you don't agree with it. Listen to them. And I think we have to set that example. I mean, we may not, agree with what somebody's saying, but you don't cancel them over it. We've never had this culture where we demonize somebody for having a different view. So I think it's really, again, trying to set the example and making sure that people understand they can express different views. Not hate speech, not anything aggressive, but difference of opinions. And don't cancel me because I don't believe exactly what you believe.
Okay, so yay, that's a great note to end our discussion. Thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating discussion. Thank you for being so frank and honest about your beliefs, about being an ethical leader. I mean, it was big. So thanks to Rick, Michael, Bob, and Maria. I'm going to call Father Jim back up to the stage, and thanks to all of you.
Once again, I want to thank Carol and our guests for sharing your expertise and knowledge. Your comments and sharings will help us all grow to be better people and professionals. So thank you very, very much. I want to also take this opportunity to thank those, especially the committee who helped create this wonderful event, and the staff from the Archdiocese of Los Angeles for your professional guidance and sharing your expertise for this inaugural event. I think it was wonderful, and there was great opportunity for people to connect, to share, and to hear from experts good advice to help us to continue to be good people. Thank you very, very much. I'd ask you to also please mark your calendars for May 3rd of 2025 when we will hold the second inaugural event, okay? So please, we'll hold it at that time. Underneath your chairs, there's a bag with some goodies in it. There's Girl Scout cookies. I cheated and look at mine already. And also, we invite any of you who would like to take the centerpiece as a special gift. Take it back to your work or give it to someone special that you know. At this time, I invite Catherine Frazier to come forward for our special raffle.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you again to our incredible panel. I hope you have a few minutes to mingle with them. I'm just hoping really quickly we could have our Ethical Leadership Planning Committee members stand. We could not have done it without you. Thank you so much. Just an incredible team of people. I also did want to mention that we have our iWatch giveaway. So if you entered the nickname CEC, anyone here? CEC? That's you? This is yours? Well, I just think that was an incredible conversation. We had some high school students watching that. I think it was a great example of how our shared values we can come together and discuss some really difficult things. So I just want to give just a couple minutes to Paula Scala, our superintendent of schools. Today's event wasn't a traditional fundraiser, but we did raise $342,000 for schools. So we're excited to give that to Paul.
Thank you, Catherine. I realize I am standing between you and the door and that some of you are likely behind, but as Catherine mentioned, my name is Paula Scala. I am the other superintendent in Los Angeles and are proud to oversee an institution that formed me. I'm a product of our Catholic schools here in Los Angeles. Your presence today is making it possible for young people in our Archdiocese. We serve nearly 70,000 children from Santa Barbara, Ventura, in Los Angeles in our Catholic schools. I've got a quick question for everybody. How many of you attended a Catholic school? Raise your hand. How many of you have a child, a grandchild, a family member going to a Catholic school? Okay. We talk about ethics. We talk about leadership. The intersection of that happens in our Catholic schools. I am proud to lead a ministry. We are not a school district. We are a church, and we can talk about our faith. And when we talk about our faith, this is where our moral compass is founded. It is endowed to us by our Creator. It is endowed to us by our faith. We don't have to look that far to know what to do. We don't have to ask ourselves right and wrong. We know the answer to that, and it is founded deep and rooted in our faith, and it's in our schools. You are supporting that through the Catholic Education Foundation, helping 13,000 children attend a Catholic school, making that affordable. This event is supporting that. This event is supporting young people who otherwise don't have access to a world-class education, to get that education in our poorest communities where we have been serving since 1856. This institution is thriving as a result of your support. We want to thank you so very much for your presence today, your support. Thank you. It's because of you that we are forming young people with the moral compass and the ethical leadership to lead our city into the future. Thank you so very much. God bless you.